To start off, I'm really wondering, where did you get the idea for this film?
From many instances, and they come with increasing frequency, in which I'm at a party and I can't remember the name of the person who's come up to me and knows me really well, and sometimes it gets to the point that the person actually says to me, you remember me, right? My name's John. And of course, that's just kind of call it dégonflé in French, just like everything just deflates at that point. And, oh yeah, John, nice to see you again. So with enough of those instances having happened, I began to wonder, well, what is it that makes us forget? Or more importantly, what is it that makes us able to remember that person? Because, sometimes it's totally excusable that you don't know this person because you haven't seen him in like 8 years. So what is it that makes you actually remember that person? How is it that you're able to pull that person out of your long-term memory and actually be able to remember them? For me, that's kind of a miraculous thing that we're able to do that. One of the big, incredible things about how we're able to be intelligent in this world and remember people we know. That we're that smart and that social that we can actually do that. So, what I know about how that's done in your brain is very much like the game Password. Right. Like there's a word association or an idea association that your subconscious is doing all that while that you're holding your drink and really trying to remember that person. And it seemed to me that those two really go together quite naturally. The game show Password, I don't know if you know that.
Of course, yes.
With the 60s version with Alan Ludden and often starring Betty White and Dick Van Dyke and Carol Burnett and Elizabeth Montgomery from Bewitched, those great people who were the celebrity guest stars. So I turned that a little bit around and I made that a little bit more metaphysical and turned it into this person's whole subconscious.
Right. Well, and I love the idea that obviously because it's about psychology, how much psychology plays a part in the whole process. Yeah. Where did you choose the cast of characters that appear in his memory? Where do they come from?
It's a really weird mix of characters. Like in the original game show Password, as I said, there are these great folks, people who I grew up with, like Dick Van Dyke and Sammy Davis Jr., so they're in there.
Of course.
But as you see in the film, there are a lot of other kind of bizarre, there's kind of a bizarre mixture of other characters, like William S. Burroughs and James Joyce and Salvador Dali.
And Lovecraft, I really love the Lovecraft.
Yeah. The four people you mentioned, are very creative parts of what Charles would have grown up with.
Right.
Like the art of Salvador Dali, the literature of Burroughs and Lovecraft, and sorry, lost my train of thought there because there was a third person in there. But yeah, these guys are authors, and in the case of James Joyce, the fourth person, I was trying to remember there. James Joyce was, he wrote Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. He's the dude who is probably arguably the most responsible author in the English language for introducing people's subconscious processes to literature. Like Ulysses is just this stream of consciousness, what's happening underneath the surface of this guy's thought process over the course of a single day. And so he's in there, that's sort of gibberish that he's saying there, but that gibberish is like what we ourselves do to kind of negotiate the world around us. Burroughs as well, a little bit, very much in there. I'm paying homage to his taking a little bit of a darker turn than James Joyce. And then there are all these other characters like Charles's babysitter from when he was
Right.
4, and another writer, Ayn Rand. I just had to get Ayn Rand in there. That she just represents everything that is tyrannical and oppressive about, well, in the case of Charles, his subconscious, and he goes as far as to confuse her with his mom, which she really isn't. But Ayn Rand has this terrifying, imposing kind of presence in the film. So yeah, the characters are all there for, I think, a pretty good reason. But they, in Charles's subconscious, they do get, there's a mix, a hodgepodge, and it's kind of confusing, bizarre melange of special guest stars.
And as you started making it, did any of it change? Did you plan for someone or something along the way, and then once you started actually creating it, did it change, or no?
Yeah, I mean, the special guest stars who were there, I mean, the pool of guest stars that I had originally had was a lot larger. It included, like, Carl Jung, for example, and Joseph Campbell, and these other champions of people's subconscious and their myth making. But yeah, I had to
Trim it back.
trim it back a little bit. Yeah. So yeah, I'd say that in general there was a lot of trimming back that I did over the course of writing the script and doing the storyboarding, where you want to. For me, I throw, in the early script stages, storyboard stages, I'm throwing everything at it, and then as I'm doing it, I'm taking stuff out. So that's sort of how the process changed. It's kind of subtractive. Things have to come out rather than new things really going in.
Right.
Yeah.
Was there any one thing that you really wish that you could have kept that had to be cut?
I was a little heartbroken to take out Carl Jung. Carl Jung is, this great psychoanalyst, psychologist, person who really brought in the idea of our collective subconscious. So yeah, I kind of shed a tear when I had to say goodbye to it.
I'm really curious too, in terms of your visual style. I mean, when you're making, all the storyboards and going into it, your visual style is reality meets dream almost, from my perspective.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you're approaching it, do you have a certain visual style that you're trying to approach, or does it just kind of come out?
That's a good question. I mean, like in my previous line of films, I've tended to gone very realistic, surrealistic, with combining that realism and psychology. And in this film, I went a little bit less realistic. I went a little bit more cheap. Like you see Ayn Rand, for example, and she's just she's just a cardboard cutout character, except for her eyes and her mouth, which are live action, pasted, slapped onto the face there, and that's kind of like that's almost as cheap as it gets.
Right.
Like, I don't know if you remember Clutch Cargo from the 1960s.
Yes.
Clutch Cargo is an inspiration.
Oh, that's cool.
In that way. So there's a lot of other cheapness, like James Joyce is kind of a Terry Gilliam kind of like just pasting of his photograph or versions of his photograph as he turns his head from one direction to the next. And then, of course, Dick Van Dyke and Sammy Davis Jr. are just live action rotoed out, although very cheaply done, I'm going to say. So I really like, in this film, I really like the idea of going really lo-fi in a lot of the characters. A few of the characters are still pretty realistic, like Charles and the host. I was doing kind of a little bit of a risk on this because I don't know if you're familiar with the term uncanny valley. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they're very uncanny valley.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a pretty derogatory term when you talk of films that do CG realistic characters, but they're not quite actually human. The response to that tends to be pretty negative. That these there's a kind of a creepy element. Mm-hmm. You think of like Polar Express, for example.
Of course.
Yeah, almost terrifying, and generally it's unintentionally terrifying, mm-hmm. right? But I was wanting to explore that kind of uncanny valley phenomena in a way that hopefully for me and for the audience is not creepy.
Right.
I think there is actually some value in exploring that kind of realism, not quite live action real, because in this case it's our subconscious, and what we do with our when we're trying to negotiate the world is that we project the reality of people and things in the world into our subconscious minds, and those projections are very realistic, or often are very realistic, without quite being real. Sounds like the uncanny valley.
Right.
So I go realistic with Charles and the host as very realistic but not quite real people, but with other characters like Ayn Rand and others, they're more fuzzy. They're more not quite real, and so they become cheaper and more lo-fi, as I said before. So that making these kind of trying to make these stylistic choices, and there's I think a little bit of a risk, because people might not get the uncanny valley kind of joke there. I mean, this is a joke, and kind of confuse it with something like Polar Express, which I don't really want to have happen. I'm hoping that maybe that people will see that there's actually something going on with the imagery that I've got in this film that says something about how we actually see the world.
Right. Last question. I'm curious. Basically, approaching TIFF. What's it like for you at TIFF? Because I mean, obviously you're no stranger to it, but how do you approach a new year at the festival?
I mean, TIFF, I've had 2 other of my films at TIFF, The Spine in 2009 and Ryan in 2004. And I mean, the thing about TIFF, which I find really consistent compared to other film festivals, is that there is a lot of attention, a lot of respect for the form of short filmmaking.
Right.
Like other film festivals like Venice and Berlin and Telluride, etc., do show short films, but they're more of an afterthought. It's not that way here at TIFF. There's this really great, with the program Shortcuts Canada, there's this, for me, this kind of almost surprising amount of attention shown to this, a lot of respect shown to this, and I love that. I love being, not just because I live here and this is my home,
right,
and so it's like, kind of coming home. It's like very much of a home crowd, but it's also got that real sheen, the patina of that short films really do matter. They do count, and they do. The kind of storytelling you can do with those is way different in some ways way better than what you can do with a feature film format, and it really shows here. The programming, the way that they there's 6. I think there are 6 programs for short films, right. Shortcuts Canada, and there's generally a lot of attention paid to theme and to tone of each of these programs. It's phenomenal. It's great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew.